Look down at your hand right now. At some point in the next week or two, without really thinking about it, you're going to trim your fingernails. It's such a small, automatic chore that you've probably never once considered what it actually requires. A precise cutting tool, enough coordination to use it safely on your own body, and the awareness, repeated every couple of weeks for your entire life, that this needs to happen at all. Now take that chore and delete every tool involved. No steel clippers, no scissors, no emery board. Just you, your hands, and nails that never under any circumstances stop growing. That was every single one of your ancestors for the overwhelming majority of human existence. Here's the detail that makes this genuinely interesting instead of trivial. Fingernails are not optional decoration. They grow continuously, roughly 3 millimeters a month, whether you want them to or not. Left completely untouched, human nails will keep growing until they curl, catch on things, tear painfully at the quick, and become a serious liability for anyone who depends on their hands to survive. If you're gripping a spear shaft, working a stone tool, climbing, digging, or handling raw meat, an overgrown, cracked, or torn nail isn't a cosmetic issue. It's an open door for infection in a world with no antibiotics. So the question is a real one. What did people do about this? For the hundreds of thousands of years before anyone invented a blade specifically designed for the job, the most obvious place to look for an answer is the family tree. We're primates, and other primates deal with the exact same growth process, which means their solutions have been documented by researchers for decades. Jane Goodall's long-term studies of wild chimpanzees at Gombe recorded something that turns out to be directly relevant. Chimpanzees groom themselves and each other constantly, and part of that grooming includes using their teeth, biting and nibbling at their own nails and cuticles to keep them manageable. It's not a rare, isolated behavior. It's a routine, near-daily part of primate self-maintenance that gives us a strong, well-supported baseline. Before there were tools designed for this purpose, the default primate solution was almost certainly biting, exactly the same instinctive behavior that shows up in human children today, usually well before any adult ever teaches them to do it. Nail biting isn't a modern nervous habit invented by stressed office workers. It's very likely one of the oldest, most deeply wired grooming behaviors we have, inherited directly from a shared ancestor with other great apes. But biting alone has limits, especially for toenails, which are considerably harder to reach and considerably tougher to manage with teeth alone. And this is where the evidence gets genuinely more interesting, because researchers studying ancient teeth themselves found something unexpected. Anthropologists examining Neanderthal front teeth have documented a strange, consistent pattern of wear and small parallel grooves, evidence widely interpreted as the result of what researchers call the stuff and cut method. The idea is that Neanderthals would hold an object, hide, plant material, or other material between their front teeth and slice at it with a stone tool held in one hand, using their mouth essentially as a third hand or vice grip. That same basic technique, using teeth to anchor and hold something steady while a sharp edge does the actual work, is exactly the kind of low-tech solution that could have been applied to trimming an especially stubborn or overgrown nail, using a stone flake as the cutting edge instead of fingers alone. This matters because it shifts the story away from pure biology and toward technology, however primitive. Stone tools, some of the oldest and most basic artifacts our species and its relatives ever made, have razor-sharp edges when freshly knapped, sharp enough to butcher an animal carcass with precision. A sharp obsidian or flint flake is, in a very real sense, the ancestor of every blade that came after it, including the one sitting in your bathroom drawer right now, shaped specifically for your fingernails. There's no reason to think that same sharp edge, already essential for cutting hide, meat, and plant fiber, wouldn't occasionally get used on an inconveniently long or cracked nail as well. Not a specialized tool, just the general-purpose sharp thing, pressed into service for one more everyday task. The picture becomes much clearer once actual purpose-built grooming tools start showing up in the archaeological record, and the timing of that is worth pausing on. The oldest known dedicated manicure implements come from ancient Mesopotamia, roughly 5,000 years ago, discovered in royal tombs alongside other high-status burial goods. These weren't crude scrapers. They were finely crafted sets, sometimes gold, including small implements clearly designed for cleaning and shaping nails, buried specifically because they were considered valuable enough to accompany someone into the afterlife. That detail alone tells you something important. By the time formal history begins, nail care wasn't just functional maintenance anymore. It had already become a status marker, a sign of refinement and wealth worth memorializing in a tomb. Ancient Egyptian sources describe a similarly loaded meaning attached to nail color specifically, with certain shades reportedly reserved for royalty, a detail suggesting that grooming had, by this point, layered a second function entirely on top of the original practical one. It wasn't just about preventing torn, infected nails anymore. It had become a visible, deliberate signal of who you were. There's a well-preserved piece of physical evidence that bridges this gap in a genuinely striking way. Ötzi, the naturally mummified body of a man who died in the Alps roughly 5,300 years ago, was recovered with an extensive personal toolkit, including a small, flint-bladed knife, kept sharp, well-maintained, and carried on his person. Researchers studying Ötzi's remains have documented that his nails showed signs consistent with regular grooming and maintenance rather than neglect. He wasn't carrying a dedicated nail tool, the way the Mesopotamian royal burials would later include, but he was carrying exactly the kind of small, sharp, personal blade that could easily have done double duty, one moment cutting cordage or preparing food, the next trimming a torn or overgrown nail, because in a world before specialization, tools rarely had just one job. Put all of this together, and you get a much less mysterious, much more human answer than the question initially suggests. There was no single missing technology waiting to be invented before ancient humans could manage their nails. The solution was layered, the same way most ancient solutions were. Teeth first, an inheritance from a shared primate ancestor, still visible in human children today, before anyone teaches them otherwise. Then, wherever teeth weren't quite enough, whatever sharp stone tool happened to already be in hand for butchering, scraping, or cutting, pressed into occasional secondary use. And eventually, once societies grew complex enough to support specialists, craftsmen, and status symbols, a dedicated tool finally built for exactly this one purpose, and valuable enough to be buried with kings. None of this required a single dramatic invention. It required exactly what most human problems have always required, whatever was already on hand, adapted again and again, until eventually someone built something better and it stuck. So the next time you absent-mindedly trim your nails with a tool built for precisely that job and nothing else, remember that you're doing something your ancestors managed for hundreds of thousands of years, using nothing more than teeth and whatever sharp edge happened to be nearby. The tool changed. The problem, and the quiet daily solving of it, never did. Look down at your hand again. Somewhere behind that small, forgettable chore is a 5,000-year-old golden toolkit, a mummified traveler's carefully kept flint blade, a set of grooves worn into Neanderthal teeth, and, underneath all of it, the same simple primate habit your ancestors were doing long before any of them were technically human at all.